When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AI Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our quick publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AI Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AI Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to anfieldindexpro.com and get started today.
Hello and welcome to the Mindfield podcast from Anfield Index Pro. As always, I am your host, Alan O'Donoghue, and I am joined by my partner in crime, the great Dr. Andrew Vincent. Andrew, how are you today?
I'm good. My computer could handle it this time. We just tried to record the same intro, and when Al said the great doctor, my computer had a meltdown. It doesn't believe it. So this time it held up fine, so we'll continue with the pod. But I'm doing well. Liverpool's season is over.
We were all doing well too, Andrew, until you just announced that. We thought it was still on.
Did you?
No. No.
2 weeks ago, it was a maybe. And now it's not. Now it's really over. And it has ended in a very deeply frustrating and upsetting fashion.
Yeah, I think if we were to poll every single LFC fan out there, I think most would say just call it off now. Let's just not bother with the last few matches. Which is sad.
It is.
But I'm glad I didn't spend €2,500 buying a ticket for the Wolves match. I'm glad of that. But
yeah, you thought about it.
I did. I considered it. And then my bank balance went, you can unconsider that. There you go.
In a different version of events, that would have been money well spent, and in this version of events there would be some buyer's remorse.
Yeah, I always say, or I have always said since Istanbul in 2005, that it was the best worst trip of my life. It was horrendous. It was expensive. The trip was horrendous, but I was there, and all the goals, all the penalties were directly in my line of sight. So it was the best, worst trip ever.
Mm.
So
maybe that's the name of our podcast. Is that what we should talk about? The Klopp reign is the best, worst trip ever. I think that's unfair, actually. I think that's a bit unfair. But this year has been tough at the end, at the very least.
Yeah, and we do want to kind of look at the end of the Klopp era, moving into the Slot era, and how we think they might differ, given comments and given experience and given previous, I suppose, data from both. So I suppose there's definitely a narrative, Andrew, at the moment going around that, or not a narrative, sorry, but a question among all football fans, not just Liverpool fans, and it floats around the idea of, has Klopp's tenure not been as successful as it should have been? What do you think?
My answer is, yeah, I guess the question, no, it has not been as successful as it should have been, or yes, it should have been more successful. Either way, I think there was space in the cabinets for more silverware. I think we were very close. I want to be mindful too, because there's a lot of disappointment right now, and recent emotions can color our overall view and bias. And there were a lot of times where this team performed at unbelievable levels and didn't win anything. It's like the first Champions League final against Real Madrid and the Karius situation, right? Or the Mo Salah situation, or like the different things that popped up in these different games. They're tough, and they're razor thin margins. And, one of our things today is to really dissect this in terms of Klopp and a process focus versus an outcome focus. And is Klopp enough of a killer and that sort of thing? And like, I have some criticisms there, or at least some reflections there. But I think it's probably also important, can we really put those moments on him? Can we really be like, hey, if he was a little different as a person, Karius doesn't get a concussion, or that concussion's handled differently? Or if he was a little different as a person, like Mo Salah doesn't get whatever that was from jiu-jitsu by Sergio Ramos. Those things are hard to say. But I think it does frame a nice discussion about process and outcome focus and being competitive and winning. And a thing I've thought a couple times is Klopp has done an absolutely incredible job of bringing us from doubters to believers. And part of it is just when I started supporting Liverpool, but it was more or less after Istanbul. And so to me, being a team that was in the Champions League finals regularly was a dream, that felt crazy at part, during the Hodgson era, during the Rodgers era, when we were losing to Ludo Goretz, to be one of those teams that people were expecting to be in the Champions League final regularly, to be expecting to be competing to win the league. That was, not even on my radar, really. That was like, wow, what would that be like? And now that's our reality, and that's where we feel like we should be, and that's great. But I think going from being believers to champions regularly is probably a little bit of a different mindset and skill set.
Okay, so a mindset and skill set. And, I'm glad I got to ask you that question and that it wasn't the other way around, because I'm not sure, given the cheating juggernaut that is Man City, with a coach who is likely to go down as one of the greatest coaches in the history of the sport, if not the greatest coach in the history of the sport. Now, whether you agree with that or I agree with that, it doesn't matter. It's going to happen. That's like Pep has been so successful that, and to repeat that success and, potentially win a fourth championship in a row, which has never happened in the Premier League era. It's hard to say definites, but all we can talk about is our opinions. And I think that one of the things that Klopp has always been apparently, or looked like, he's prided himself on, has been that we are the underdogs. And then when he got them to not being the underdogs, it didn't kick on. It wasn't like, okay, now we are the best and we need to keep moving. And maybe that's where the he's not a killer didn't come in, because how we fluctuated, we essentially had 2 years that we were phenomenal and then fell off a cliff. Now, granted, we lost, almost every single walking first teamer that we could have, but we fell off a cliff. And then we picked back up again and we fell off a cliff again. And we've picked up again this year. But at the end of the day, we're coming out with the Carabao Cup. And it's something I've been saying since November time, December time, is like, why? And I know I'm not the only one, but why are we playing Mo Salah? Why are we playing Virgil van Dijk? Why are we playing Alisson in the Carabao Cup third or fourth round? This isn't going to end well. And I'm not saying that that's the only reason, but it's not turning out too good. And a lot of it, I think, is down to fatigue. So people will point to it, well, if Klopp hadn't announced that he was leaving, that makes no difference. We've had players get injured and re-injure because of the decisions that the coaching team are making. Now, it's really, really hard. Like, it's very easy for us to say, oh, Klopp should have rested them. He has to win matches.
Mm-hmm.
And he was. But I wonder, and this is where we'll maybe bring in a quote you sent to me from our new coach coming in, Arne. If a coach only talks about the process, then 9 out of 10 times the results are bad. And that struck you, and when you sent it to me, it struck me. Because when I look at the years with Klopp, it has been phenomenal. Like, it is the best since the Kenny era and Joe Fagan and the 80s. Like, it was, we just haven't had that. And it has been such an amazing journey. But maybe we didn't win as much. Maybe we didn't win the big things that we could have won had we had a focus of outcome as important as process.
Yeah, and the reason I sent you the quote, and the reason it jumped out so much to me, I don't even think I finished the article I was reading. I was so excited about the quote. I think I cut and pasted it and sent it to you. I probably just typed it. It's not that long. But anyway, I sent it to you, and part of it is we talk so much about the process, and I talk so much about the process. And from a psychology of performance perspective, having a really good process to fall back on is so important. So this quote that kind of pokes a little bit of a hole in that, or is a bit contrarian to that, raises a really important point that, I think lives somewhere in the back of my head, but also isn't something I pay a ton of attention to, which is outcomes matter. And having some balance between a process and outcome focus matters, and having a drive to win and get that over the line makes a difference. And this isn't saying if you're just focused on outcomes and you're not focused on your process, you're not going to get anywhere other than probably somewhere pretty frustrated. But if you're just focused on your process and you're not weighting outcome heavily enough, there's going to be moments where you're frustrated with a game where you played okay, or you're not as frustrated with a game where you played okay but didn't win as maybe you might be. And maybe sometimes it does make the difference between getting that game over the line and not. And making certain decisions at certain times to get a win, rather than just being focused on this person's developing well or this person's playing well, or at an organizational level. It's not just Klopp making these calls, but at an organizational level, moving on that player and buying someone new who's going to be a starter and going to be of a certain level, to put us towards the top, to put us at the top, to say this is what we need to win, not just, let's see if this person and this person can stay healthy and kick on, then probably we could be really good or okay, right? The difference between, no, get the person who gives us a chance to win now, and, let's see what this person can become. Having a balance of those things is important, but if you think about the ripple down of all those different decisions of someone who's really focused on winning now, what are the things that they're going to do that someone who's really focused on building a process isn't? Those things probably add up over time. And I don't know what the differences look like. And it's not that I think Klopp is uncompetitive. I do think, for what it's worth, that the version of Klopp that was giving Adam Lallana piggyback rides and picking up his broken glasses off the ground was more of a killer than the Klopp who's taking press conferences today. And so I think there's something that, I think when he's noticing his own fatigue level, when he's noticing his own and saying, I'm getting tired and stuff like that, I think probably part of how that plays out is he's noticing he's not quite as invested. And I don't think that's about he doesn't care or whatever. I don't think he's just kind of phoning it in through the end. But I think in some ways the amount of energy it takes to be that competitive is draining. And I wonder if that's maybe a little bit of what's not quite there in the same way, is he has the energy to be attentive to this process or grow this process that's done well this year. But it's like that real edge isn't quite the same.
Yeah. And look, for anyone listening, we're not, kicking the dying corpse here of Jurgen. We're like, that's not what we're saying. But we're just posing the question to think about. And there's no answers. Like, we're posing a question that cannot be answered. All that there can be is opinion. And that's what we're offering, is just opinion. And, Slot could come in and it could be a disaster. we just don't know.
Well, right. And just because Slot had that quote, like, I don't even know if he's more competitive. I don't know if he's more of a killer. I don't know if that's part of his skill set. I literally basically don't know anything about him except we Wikipedia'd him before the game, well, before we talked today. Arne is short for Arend, which we assume is Dutch for Andrew, but someone can correct us if that's incorrect. And he said that quote, and like whatever else the Athletic has sort of put out about him, I've read like a decent amount. But like, and like you said, this isn't trying to discredit Jurgen Klopp. Mindset and skill set. There is no better manager we could have had over the last 9 years.
Absolutely.
Like, I 100% believe that. And I think part of that is you don't turn the team, Brendan Rodgers' team, into the group we have now without an incredible focus on process, without being really dialed into development. There's players who you don't compete with this Man City team without having a focus on development and process and being able to bring in the things that, we do have. There's no better manager who we could have had up to this point.
And we also don't we also don't bring in the level and quality of player that we had if we didn't have the outcome.
Right.
So if we didn't win the league, if we didn't win the Champions League, if we weren't competing in Champions League finals, if we weren't getting 97 points and finishing second, we wouldn't have attracted the players that would develop, and we wouldn't be able to hold on to the best young players to bring them through. So that wouldn't happen without the outcome. So, we're just posing a hypothetical question here.
Yeah. Well, and I think when you get so close on so many things, and like 2 Champions League finals that we didn't win, and like one of them is the Mo Salah jiu-jitsu moment or the Ramos jiu-jitsu moment, and the other one is the Loris Karius. And like, you get that close on 2 Champions League finals, 1 Europa League final, how many second place finishes to Man City? Like, at some point, it's so hard to parse out. Like, the moments become so small. Can Klopp's mentality really change those things? Is that about him not being focused enough on winning that we didn't win those? Is it just these circumstances? Like, it gets pretty crazy to look at those and say, if Klopp were more competitive, we take home those trophies. It's to get that close, and even over the last handful of games, like, in some ways, and this is where the process versus outcome focus becomes complicated. Like, if you focus on XG, we haven't had a team against us have more XG than us over the past 3 or 4 games, right? That hasn't been the problem. In terms of the process is sort of sound to some extent because you're creating more better chances than the other team is creating good chances. You sort of, quote unquote, should win those games. But then there's still something very visibly missing right now. And if that's about fatigue, it becomes really hard to parse out. Is this about Klopp not being focused enough on winning? But I think in terms of this idea of skill set and mindset, Klopp there's no manager I would rather have take over a club that needs to go from okay to great. I don't know if he would be the number one person I would pick to go from great to champions.
Interesting.
And, that's where we are.
Who would you pick outside of Pep?
I have no idea. I don't know if I know managers like in scope well enough, but I can name some qualities that like I would maybe pick from. I think you probably want someone who's like a little bit more of like a Sir Alex Ferguson quality of I'm happy to change anyone below me, right? Like I'll change my coaching staff every 3 years. I'll change whatever players I need to, like as much as obviously people talk about having their important relationships with him, like he very much saw himself as the pinnacle of that system, right? And he's happy to change things below and recognize that continual change is an important part of keeping things really competitive. And so I think someone who's going to foster that kind of ongoing competitiveness and be willing to send people out the door before it's their time even, in order to keep things fresh and changing and competitive and on the edge. I think that's probably an important quality for really consistent success. I think it's, to me, and this is kind of a cultural thing and like a soccer cultural thing, but like I would kind of want a manager who at the start of the season, like rather than saying like, yeah, we don't want to talk about the outcome of the league now. Like we want, we'll do what we need to do. And then, when there's 5 games left, we'll start counting. Like, fuck that. Like, I kind of want someone who's just going to say, no, we want to win. This is our goal. And there's no reason we shouldn't. I think that's an important quality too. Just being able to say, and like people be like, oh, well, it adds pressure. Good. Like if this is a winning team, if this is a winning organization, then we should not be afraid of that pressure. Put the pressure on us. Because what it also adds to us is some of that fear factor of like, yeah, we're still taking it one game at a time. Like you can be focused on the process and outcome at the same time. You can be focused on the process of what do we need to do every game and still say we want to win this league and we see no reason why we shouldn't. And so I think something like that probably becomes an important quality too. It's just being able to state and like hold up to being a favorite and not having to, I hesitate to say hide out as an underdog, but I know that's a strategy that gets used. And I think Jurgen Klopp's the best underdog there is. He has, as far as someone who's going to motivate a team, although the further away Rocky is from being a relevant cultural reference for young people, probably the harder time Jurgen's going to have motivating underdogs. But like, I think no one is better at that than him, but I don't know if he's someone who can really comfortably just say, yeah, we're the favorite or we're the team, or this is how we're approaching this or whatever. So I think those qualities become important and probably some others too.
Yeah. And while listening to you, what's coming to me is I think that is the structure that's trying to be implemented, where Michael Edwards is actually the Alex Ferguson of Liverpool going forward. And, where he will be the pinnacle. And I suspect he probably would be more open to getting rid of anybody below him if they are not performing to a level that the expectations are there. And that's probably a good thing in some ways. But if we look at the challenge of that, when Alex Ferguson left, there was a massive vacuum. So, I'm really curious to see when Pep leaves, what that will look like for City. Now, I know they have more of a structure in place where it's not just all on him. He's not signing the players or picking the players. But, I think the potential charges that they're facing will probably mask over the vacuum that will be created when he leaves. So I think I can completely understand FSG's decisions in the wake of Klopp deciding to leave. It makes perfect sense to bring Michael Edwards in at a level that he feels confident and they feel confident that he can achieve. And he knows the club, he understands the club, he knows a lot of the players, and then he's bringing in people that fit with the model he was beginning to build with Jurgen, and that changed. So it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out over the next 4 to 5 years.
I don't need a VPN. I've got nothing to hide. This is what I used to tell myself before I hooked up with libertyshield.com. Not only is my home internet now fully encrypted, but I can now access all the websites I want, whenever I want, and do so from absolutely anywhere. As a Liverpool fan, I love to know I can now watch every match, regardless of whether it's on UK TV or not. My Liberty Shield VPN makes sure nothing is blocked and guarantees me super fast streaming speed throughout that match. You can get connected right now with their software package, which includes a 48-hour no-obligation free trial and instant access to their apps for Apple, Android, Fire TV, PC, Mac and Android TV. Or go a step further like I have and get one of their pre-configured VPN routers. These small but powerful devices allow you to easily connect every device in your home to VPN, making it the perfect solution for smart TVs, Mac boxes and games consoles. Visit libertyshield.com today and use coupon code AIVPN25 to get 25% off at checkout.
It's an interesting point that you make about, okay, when you have this person who's so central to everything, who's the person changing things beneath them, like you leave this vacuum behind you. And I wonder a little bit if feeling comfortable with that possibility is also part of what can lead to winning. And when I say that, what I mean is like, this happens more in American sports, where there's some acceptance of like, there's just going to be cycles to things. And we might really go for it for 2 and 3 years. And then it is going to be burned down. We're going to have to rebuild and it's going to be burned down. You know, like it's going to be, we might be bad for a while, but we're going to go for this now and have this sustained period of success now. And we're going to put things on the line and trade our draft picks, and we're going to trade our future for the present. And, you know, it's the difference between, do I bring in the player who's going to be an elite level starter now, or do I play the player for the next 2 years who's young and could be an elite level talent if he develops well, but is going to need 2 years of solid playing time where he's going to make some mistakes? And like, my preference is developmental. And look, to be honest, like if I were a manager, would I be a good manager to bring you from believers to champions? I would not. I'm positive about that. Like interpersonally, like I would sort of favor loyalty and like development, like in terms of having like a focus on developing a process versus really being dialed into winning. Like I tend to be kind of on the more process focused developmental side. Like I like winning, but I'm not. I know people who just like need to win, you know, and that has its own shortfalls. But I think if you have those people who need to win and the right skill set to be able to develop a process, I know who's going to win more often than not. It's the person who needs to. And like, I think that person who's like, why am I playing this kid? Like, that's not as good as someone who I can bring in. Maybe that's a trade-off that's worthwhile, you know, and like maybe that does leave some destruction in its wake. Maybe that means there's some bad years afterwards. Maybe that means like, you know, someone leaves the club angry and there's bad blood. You know, like I think it's worth considering. I'm not even saying one is necessarily better than the other, or like over the longer term, what would you rather have? I don't know. But I think sometimes what I notice is that it's like there's planning for 10 perfect years. And it's like when you listen to Dave Hendricks talk about players. It's always interesting is like he'll talk about like these young players in different positions and he'll be like, there's your left back spot sorted for 10 years. And it's like, I get the idea and it's nice to imagine that. And maybe sometimes that happens, but it almost never happens. Even players who are elite for 3 or 4 years in a row, that's incredible, right? The 3 or 4 elite years. To have that player not have any bad seasons, or to assume that that player in that context is going to be elite right there for 10 years happens so rarely. So often, maybe you have a player who's really elite and then goes somewhere else and they're elite for a period of time there. To have a player in one spot who's elite there for 10 years and you change things around them just doesn't happen that much. And I wonder if sometimes a focus on development and process and how that's going to set us up for the long term takes away from the shorter term focus on winning, and how often maybe you do need to trade the longer term in order to get some of the wins now.
Yeah, and maybe that feeds into the level of loyalty that Jurgen has shown over the years, where he was unable to separate himself from the people that he trusted with to bridge that gap. So, and who's to say it's right or wrong? Like I'm sure most players that have gone through their time with Jurgen will say he's the nicest guy you'll ever meet. And, talking about trading for the future or trading for right now or the future, I'm a Chicago Bears fan. We have Justin Fields as a quarterback. You know what I mean? Like that's a decision to go for the long term. And it hasn't paid off much, although last year was better than the previous year. But that is exactly what you're talking about. They made a decision, we're going to stick with this young guy and see if he can develop into a level of elite quarterback that can then change the trajectory of us as a squad. And maybe it'll pay off. Who knows?
Well, I think it's interesting to then go back and be critical of Klopp's loyalty is so complicated because it's like, did he hold on to the Milner, Henderson, those kinds of players for too long? Yes, but then it was like, last year when he held on to those players, the year before, they had gotten very close to a quadruple, right? And like fighting right to the end for everything. Mm-hmm. And like, I think that's the question is like, how do you change that? Right? Like, how do you get a manager? Like, you really expect that guy to then say, well, these players clearly aren't good enough. And like, we need new players. And I think maybe the manager we're talking about does make that decision and does say, I'm going to take this team that got very close to winning everything, and I'm going to say they're not good enough anymore. And that is super hard. I don't know how comfortable I feel with that, to be honest with you.
But it doesn't happen. Like Pep hasn't done it. He's gradually changed players, but he doesn't have wholesale changes where it's like he's gone because I've had enough.
But I also think they're not afraid to move on players who are still very good.
Absolutely, because they know they've money to bring somebody else in who's better.
Sure. They have the money to bring someone in, but like I think they'll take players who have been contributing at a very high level and sort of be like, yeah, we're making a tactical change. This part of our approach needs to be different or better. We want something different for this year. So I'll move on. I think Pep, because he's such a tinkerer, will change something that's working. And sometimes he loses because of it too, right? So I don't know, like pick your poison. I guess you just lose no matter what. But sometimes you lose no matter what.
Yeah.
But like, I think sometimes you do have to be willing to burn it all down. Like even in the middle of it being very good, to just say like, no, this needs to be better, and this needs to be elite. And obviously that requires some money, but then also, I even think in our recruitment, and who knows how much Klopp had to do with this at different times, but in our recruitment, there were moments where adding another piece, adding an elite piece would have made a huge difference. This year, even having an elite holding midfielder instead of Endo, who knows what kind of difference that would have made, right? Like this year, I don't know, bringing in that one extra center back to just like create a little bit more space for people to get some rest when they needed it. Bringing in one more elite attacking player. What would that have done? And did we have the money for it? I mean, we bid 110 million on Caicedo allegedly, so there's got to be money somewhere, unless that was really just like a play. Yeah, and but actually, when Chelsea came back with that second bid, someone was like, "Oh, thank God!" Like we
Yeah, but I do think that what you're saying is important. Like, we will all, as fans, look at Klopp's tenure and we'll make up our opinions on whether he stayed too loyal, whether he didn't stay too loyal, whether he should have sold, not sold, whatever. But it's all based on hindsight. And it's based on hindsight that can't be proven, which is the, I suppose, why we have podcasts, because we can talk about stuff that actually never happened, or, we don't know what the outcome would have been like. And I'm wondering if the owners have learned a lesson from the Klopp era, where they're going, no, we need to have that separation between the coaches and players and the decision makers at the top. So because Klopp was, from all accounts, starting to make more of the decisions around transfers and have more of an active role in player recruitment, or was going to vouch for players to have extensions of contracts and stuff like that, maybe the owners are looking at that and going, that's not the model we want for long-term success. And that's why Edwards is even higher up than where he was before to make him further away from the people doing the job, and he can make those ruthless decisions. And all Slot has to say is, look, Virgil, I'm sorry. The decision was taken way higher than me, see you later.
Yeah.
But maybe that is a buffer. Like in my work, when I've worked in places, and I've always pointed the finger upwards, when there was things that couldn't be done. Yeah. I wish I could help you out there. I'm sorry, I can't. The boss says no. and that was the truth now, I have to be honest.
Yeah.
But absolutely, you need to have somebody in the organization who will, you can point the finger at, and then that still allows you to do your job to the best of your ability.
Right. And I think, it's an interesting point as you bring it up there, because I think in some ways FSG engaged in some calculated short-termism when they gave Jurgen all that power. And I think at some level, probably they knew, he's not as effective at Michael Edwards' job as Michael Edwards. But like he is, first of all, if you're backing off and you're thinking of it from a purely financial perspective, Klopp is financially great for the club. Just the normal one merchandise alone, I'm sure, is substantial. But Klopp is great for the club. He's great as a spokesman. Like, he's transformed things. Like, I think they're like, until he's ready to go, we'll put everything behind him. And for what it's worth, I think that's the right decision. I'm not sitting here saying he's been here too long or saying he wasn't good enough. I think really looking at, are there differences in mindset and mentality that would add more to the trophy closet? Could some of those things have gotten over the line? Is there a world where we win more of that? And maybe not over the past 10 years, but that doesn't mean that there isn't something different next. And that's also not me saying we need a total shift in approach, because we clearly don't. In order to win all of those things, you have to get close first. You have to have a working process and build the right kind of culture. And I hope it doesn't come across the wrong way today that I'm being fucking Jurgen's the underdog and he's never good enough to be a champion. It's like, look, he's won pretty much everything except the Europa League, which I can tolerate. And the number of things we've been in until the end, like that's huge. That's not always just a manager's job to get that over the line. But I think there are certain qualities that Jurgen doesn't really possess because he has other really good qualities for developing and building and bringing a group together in a certain way that facilitate winning in a different way. But it can also, like Jose Mourinho in his prime is probably a really good example. You'll win things, but like you're cleaning up afterwards, right? Or like Conte is maybe a good example. It's like, okay, you might win things, but you're cleaning up afterwards. Like there's those kind of people too who like can create that, but for a very short period of time. And, there's a mess afterwards. And so, yeah, I hope it doesn't come across as too critical of Klopp. But I think there's a worthwhile case study of, in your balance to process focus and outcome focus. What do you want? And, being 95 process and 5 outcome probably isn't really a competitive balance. I think probably being, I don't know, I have no idea on what percentage is, but like you have to have an appropriate amount of outcome in there, and that's going to affect decision making in all sorts of different ways in all sorts of different areas.
I'm going to throw something at you, Andrew, and we've only a couple of minutes left, and maybe this is something for another podcast. What do you think of the statement that Jurgen actually only won with Liverpool when he was the favourite?
I guess that technically would have been true in the Champions League final against Spurs.
Favourites in the Carabao Cup this year. Favourites in the Carabao Cup and FA Cup a couple of years ago. Favourites when we won the league.
Probably this is worth another look. Were we favourites when we won the league at the start of that season?
I think we were probably closer than we ever were to being on parity with City on the bookies markets.
Because that's different a little bit from being favourites.
I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not saying it's true or not.
It's not how I thought about it. I'd love to go. I say I'd love to do it. I don't know if I actually would. I'd love to know without having to go back and actually look how he approached the press conferences and motivation for those games to get a sense of, is he leaning into that favorites role? Is he leaning into we're the better team and we should win? Or is he shying away from it as part of his motivation and creating of narrative? You'd love to know behind the scenes how he handles that. My guess is even if we were closest we'd ever been to, the odds maker's choice for that Premier League season, I can't imagine to start it he was like, yeah, we're really this is the season we knock City off their perch and come for them and we're going to be in first. There's no way he said that, probably even down to whenever we locked up the season. He was like one game at a time, which is also good, right? Like that's good advice. But
I'm not saying that Klopp said we were favourites. I'm saying that we were the favourites going in or close enough. I'm just throwing it out there as a rhetorical kind of bit of a question. Well, not a rhetorical question, but
you scrambled my brain.
Yeah,
I don't know.
So I throw a little curveball there at you. And I think maybe that is something, maybe the only time we were favourites was Sevilla, even though they'd won 3 in a row in the Europa League final. But that's one for the listeners to have to ponder as well, and maybe we'll come back to it again very soon. But Andrew, I want to thank you so much for giving me that quote from Arne and having that conversation around Jurgen. And let's be honest, none of us would have traded the last 9 years for anything. Is that fair enough?
That is fair enough. I didn't know if you wanted that as your sign off, so I wasn't going to say anything. But yes, yeah, I agree. I wouldn't trade it. I think I think is a conversation, as I said, about this process versus outcome focus. And, are there changes in qualities that maybe foster winning now or contribute to winning now, as opposed to this more like kind of long developmental arc? Like, I think there are, but that doesn't mean I would go back and bin off Klopp and bring in someone else.
Yeah. There's no one we needed more than Jurgen at the time.
Agreed.
Andrew, thanks so much for your time. Listeners, thanks for your ears. We'll be back again very soon with the Mindfield podcast on Anfield Index Pro. Look after yourselves.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at anfieldindex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Anfield Index and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.
Sports Social Podcast Network.